Okay, let's talk about the Excel menu system starting with the ribbon. The ribbon is the large graphical menu that you see up at the top of my screen, and I have a graphic I've placed here so I can point out a couple things. So let me start by using the graphic and mention a couple of key areas of the ribbon. So the ribbon is made up of what are called tabs along the top. So you see I've got a graphic here and the Home tab is selected. I've also got an Insert tab, Page Layout tab, Formulas tab, and on and on. Now the ribbon is customizable. It changes. You can add your own tabs. You can keep some tabs from displaying. And depending on the size of your screen, you'll see more or less buttons within each tab. So your ribbon might not look exactly like mine. This is no cause for concern. Just so long as you know what we're talking about with the ribbon is what I'm focusing on now. So the ribbon is the main menu. And there's a special part of the ribbon called the File tab. I want to bring you there now, although I come back to it in a later recording, but just to introduce you to it. To the left of the Home tab, there's a special place in the menu. It's the File tab, also called the Backstage View, and it opens up a different kind of menu system than the rest of the ribbon. Here, as you are going to discover in later recordings, is where we can create new documents, open documents, save, print, and so on. Now this button up here brings us back to the main ribbon. So I'm going to click this and return to the main ribbon. More on the File tab later, focusing on the ribbon. So pertaining to the rest of the ribbon, each tab, I'm going to move up here and I'm going to talk about what are called groups. And you can see I've got a group down here illustrated, the Styles group. But let me illustrate it up here. Up on my Home tab, there's a font group. The name of the group is at the bottom. It says font. I've got an alignment group. It says alignment right here. Number group, style group, and so on. Let's go to another tab. I'll pick the Page Layout tab. And you see it is also broken down into groups. Page Setup, Scale to Fit, and so on. I'll return to the Home tab. So each tab is subdivided into groups. Now within each of these groups, you'll see a series of command buttons. And for example, the font group has a button for bold, italic, and underline. For the font face. Numbering group over here has buttons for formatting numbers and so on. So we'll be going into some of these particular buttons later on. But for now, to reinforce, each tab is broken down into groups, and within each group there is a series of command buttons. A couple more things pertaining to the ribbon. Some groups have in the lower right corner what's called a dialog box launcher. So I've got down here in my graphic something, a little call out dialog box launcher pointing to that little icon in the lower right corner. So you can see, for example, in my font group, I've got a little icon down here. Now, not all groups have these. You can see in the Styles group, there's no dialog box launcher. In the Cells group, nor in the Editing group. And if you went through each of these tabs, I'll go back to the Page Layout tab, you will find out whether the group has a dialog box launcher. Page Setup group does. The Arrange group does not. Back to the Home tab. So when you see this little icon, it means there are actually more commands pertaining to that group. So if I click the dialog box launcher for the font group, which I'm going to do now, I open up a dialog box. And within this dialog box are other options pertaining to fonts. So you can see there are some effects here that might not be up inside of the font group. And this is a dialog box. Some dialog boxes are fairly complicated, as this one is. It's got a series of tabs along the top. We'll be using and looking at this dialog box a little bit later in the class. But for now, I'm going to cancel here and come back to my worksheet. So a couple more things and we'll finish out with the ribbon. Some buttons have a drop-down arrow submenu. So the underline button has a drop-down arrow. I call it a submenu. Some people just call it a drop-down arrow. Same thing, meaning there are more commands than meet the eye initially. So for example, the clear button has a little arrow pointing down, which means there's a menu of choices. So if you see a button with an arrow pointing down and you click on that arrow pointing down, you'll get more choices for that particular command button. So The underline button is actually a two-part button. If I click the U at the underline, a regular underline will occur, but if you click the drop-down arrow, you'll get a choice. A menu shows up. So many buttons have drop-down arrows. We'll be looking at some of these buttons a little bit later on, but for now, just let your mind register when there is a submenu associated with a button. Okay, one more thing, we'll finish this up. The ribbon takes up a lot of screen space, and you can collapse it or expand it. So I want to talk about this. So there's a button up here called Ribbon Display Options. If I click that, I can decide to just show the tabs on my ribbon. And now, rather than taking up all that screen space with all the buttons, the ribbon acts like a drop-down menu. So that would be called the minimized or collapsed ribbon. If I click on that button again, I can show the tabs and commands. So there's ways of showing the ribbon or collapsing the ribbon, and you get to pick which way you'd like to work. So that rounds out our brief introduction to the ribbon. Of course, we'll be using it during this class, so I will be reinforcing some of these tools and techniques as we go.